Hi, I'm Matthew Giobbi. This is Media Psychology. In this lecture, we are going to investigate the atmosphere of research in media psychology. And I think this is best described by a lecture and a book published by a philosopher named C.P. Snow. And in 1959, C.P. Snow described what he called the two cultures. Now, in media psychology, we draw on both of these two cultures that Snow described, the cultures of the sciences, which privileges statistics, logic, experimental method, the scientific method. And we also draw on the humanities, the other culture, the second culture, which includes cultural studies, media studies, humanities, philosophy, literary criticism, and literary theory. Now, Snow described the two cultures that were not so fond of one another and did separate research projects, privileged different forms of research, and often didn't communicate with one another. The point of his lecture and his book was to promote a third culture, one that embraced both styles of research. And I think that media psychology may be the third culture that Snow had spoken of. And if we look here at the history of media research, early media research studies, click over here. We start with 4 historical trends towards contemporary media research. So one of the earliest trends was propaganda analysis, looking at how messages were propagate to spread the message to influence individuals and groups. Also public opinion research, looking at how individuals and groups viewed products, candidates, television, radio, entertainment. Public opinion research is something that has become very useful in advertising and in sales and things such as entertainment for films and television and music. Social psychology, this is the branch of psychology which was most involved with what today we'd call media psychology, and marketing research. What are the most effective ways of spreading a message? So if we look at propaganda analysis, we take a look here at the first publication, Propaganda Technique in World War I, published by Harold Laswell in 1927. Now if we look at Laswell's text, so very interesting text. Said the controls of opinion by significant symbols, by stories, rumors, reports, pictures, and other forms of social communication. Now, this is one of the earliest forms of studying one of the aspects of what we study today in media psychology and also in media studies. And to give an example of this style of research and what type of research this is, we're going to watch a video from around, a little later, but from around the time when propaganda research was very prevalent. And we'll watch this to get an idea of this sort of research.
Was it really a victory for good government, Mr. Brown? Or was it a victory for propaganda?
That's quite a question.
Well, we've been studying citizenship in school. In a few years, I'll start voting. I've been following the campaign. So much was said on both sides. I'm confused. How can you know what to believe when there's so much propaganda?
Perhaps I can help you, Chuck. I think it might also be called a victory for propaganda. But that would have been equally true if our opponent had won.
But that's what I mean. Everybody uses propaganda.
Oh, no, not everybody, Chuck. I've been studying it for some years. Propaganda made this picture. Propaganda skillfully employed to turn millions of men to a cruel hatred of their fellow men. On the other hand, propaganda often persuades us to help our fellow men. The products of our factories are also known around the world through propaganda in the form of advertising and salesmanship. The study of history reveals a great deal of propaganda that has been used to fight wars and win wars. Propaganda can also be used for peace.
So you see, Chuck, propaganda is important. Well worth any time you give studying it. I see that. But how can you study it? Well, you can begin by investigating the techniques of propaganda. Here, I've listed some of the main ones. Glittering generalities, transfer, name-calling, card stacking, testimonial, plain folks, and bandwagon. You'll find these techniques used in many places, in many ways, for many different purposes. Your job is to recognize them when you see them.
My first job is to understand what they mean. What is a glittering generality?
Well, let me see. That headline you were quoting, a victory for good government. Good government is a phrase we used many times during the campaign. We said the mayor stood for good government and promised good government.
But it's true, isn't it?
What's true? What does good government mean? Is the mayor's idea of good government the same as yours?
I see. It's a glittering generality.
One of the best.
There's another.
Yes. And why do you suppose our opponents chose that phrase?
I guess because everybody likes a real American.
Right. And they wanted to transfer that liking for a real American to Mr. Butler.
And that's what you mean by the technique of transfer.
That's it. Now let's see if you can recognize another technique. A day or so after that poster came out, I said in one of my campaign speeches, our opponent advertises himself as a real American. I say he is unreal, unrealistic. He is a visionary, a theorist, a dreamer. He is so thirsty for public office that like a weary traveler in the desert, he sees a mirage, and he is trying to sell it to you as real. There. Now what would you call that?
That's name-calling, visionary, theorist, dreamer.
That's right. And those are very polite names. But now I want you to listen to something else. For my collection of propaganda materials, I've made a special record of part of one of Mr. Butler's radio speeches.
Mayor Cooper asks that he be judged by his performance in office. Very well. Let's ask him who was mayor when the municipal waterworks fell into such a state of disrepair that the whole town was without water for 2 days. Let's ask him. But no, let's not. It might embarrass him.
You recognize the technique?
No, I don't.
It's a tricky one.
Is it true about the waterworks?
Partly true. That's what we call card stacking. Cooper was mayor when the pumping station broke down, but it was the men in office before him who allowed it to get into such a rundown condition, and it finally gave way before he could get anything done.
I see. And card stacking is choosing some facts and leaving out others, and arranging them to suit your purpose.
That's the idea. Now, did you see our little campaign rubric?
Yes, a couple of times.
Well, let's look at it again as an example of propaganda techniques.
It was a testimonial, wasn't it?
Yes, we used other techniques, too. See if you can spot them. Will you get the light, please?
Land sakes. A body hardly has time enough. The house to clean, the washing to do, and the men folks to feed. They like their chocolate cakes, too. But I do want to take time to tell you that I've known Dick Cooper ever since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He comes of a good, respectable family, just as honest as the day is long. He knows our town. He's one of us. That's why I'm going to vote for Mayor Cooper. And all my friends are going to vote for him, too.
We'll stop a minute, Chuck. Recognize the technique?
That must be what you call plain folks.
That's right. You'll find many versions of the appeal based on the common man, the man on the street, log cabin to president. Now let's look at the rest of the movie.
Mayor Cooper. Her friends are voting for Mayor Cooper. Your friends are voting for Mayor Cooper. The people know what they want, and what they want is Mayor Cooper. Don't you be left behind. Get on board the Victory Special. Vote for Mayor.
That ending's easy to spot. It's the bandwagon.
Yes, the propaganda we've been talking about is easy to detect. But a great deal of propaganda is much more hidden, much harder to detect.
That's what's bothering me. Even in a small local election, there's so much propaganda. That poster, a real American, it uses a transferred device. Does that mean it isn't true?
Not necessarily. Evaluating propaganda isn't that simple. Recognizing the technique is one step. Another step is to know the purpose. What is the purpose here?
That's easy. To get people to vote for Butler.
Yes, to persuade people that Butler is the better man, to move them to vote for him. In short, to sell Mr. Butler to the voters. You'll find that the purpose of most propaganda is to persuade people to believe something, to do something, or to buy something.
All right. But it still doesn't answer my question.
No. Your next step, and it's a big one, is to get the facts.
Well, is he a real American?
Howard Butler was born in this country. He obeys its laws. He's a good citizen. Yes, he is a real American. The same can be said for Richard Cooper. So ask yourself whether the facts support the purpose. Do they support the transfer of feeling from real American to Mr. Butler over Mr. Cooper?
No, I guess not.
Well, that's your fourth step. Weigh the facts against the purpose and the technique.
I think I understand. To know whether propaganda is good or not, whether it's true or not, I should know the purpose, recognize and judge the purpose and technique.
Don't come to a campaign manager.
I might opposition.
Well, that's all right. Whenever you're tracking down propaganda, get as many different points of view as you can.
You know something?
What?
I think that it might be interesting to make a really serious study of propaganda.
I find it interesting, and there's plenty to study. Here I have just a few of the many books on the subject. You can read them. You can keep your eyes and ears open for little bits of propaganda. And, of course, you can study whole propaganda campaigns. Here are a few on which I've been gathering material. Hitler and Nazi Germany had a propaganda that ran over many years. Then there's a wealth of propaganda to study on the subject of Russia and communism. There's propaganda to study in our own American elections, national as well as local. And in many of the major issues, such elections often hang.
Well, if I don't learn about propaganda,
Remember the techniques we outlined for studying it. Propaganda is a powerful force. So powerful that your study of propaganda is important not only to you, but to me and to the world.
So through this we see an example of early propaganda research and how it was used to inform the public. This was a public service message that was broadcast in schools, as was very common at this time, to create what today we would call media literacy. If we continue to look at the next form of earlier research, we have public opinion research. And in public opinion research, we have early ideas of polls, pseudo-polls, and statistics. This is actually where the origination of the Gallup poll of the satisfaction with the president, and getting a public opinion and basing whether or not the media message, the techniques were effective based on public opinion. Of course, this is based on consciousness. This is the belief that individuals made a conscious decision in what they believed in and what influenced them. This will be very different from the psychoanalytic interpretation a little later that we'll explore, which which demonstrated that individuals were largely motivated by irrational rather than rational opinion. We also look at social psychology. And social psychology was interested in behavior and cognition in individuals and groups. One of the first social psychologists, which is Kurt Lewin, conducted a very famous study in which young children were instructed in three forms of teacher instruction techniques. One was a very democratic style where the teacher rolled up his shirt sleeves and got involved in the actual production of the school project that the children were working on. Another was a very authoritarian or fascist style of teaching where our commands were barked and ordered at the students, and there was little fun and games, little participation with the instructor other than just giving commands. The third teaching style was a laissez-faire, liberal, very liberal, almost anarchic style where the teacher just sat back and let the kids do whatever they want. And they analyzed which group, what were the characteristics manifested in each group under the three teaching styles. Of course, these represented three forms of government: fascism, democracy, and anarchy. And what the results found in this early social psychology experiment, the research found that the best product was produced under the fascist teaching style, authoritarian teaching style. However, there was also a loss of individuality, a loss of creativity, a loss of joy. The individuals became almost like automatons. In the democratic style, there was a decent product produced. It wasn't the best product, but the children seemed to enjoy themselves and stayed very individual and did not become automaton-like, following the orders of the instructor. And finally, in the laissez-faire group, nothing was really done, but the kids had a really great time. But the product wasn't finished. So this is an example of early social psychology research. Social psychologists have always been interested in physiological responses to others and media. And part of that is the galvanometer, which studies electrical current in the body through thinking, and respiration is studied. And there are some other devices that study sexual response, plethysmograph in males and females, which we'll discuss at a later time. Finally, marketing research. Marketing research, we have an example here, 1920, Liberty in the News. We have interest in ratings, television meters, phone surveys, diaries. This is individuals who would actually track what the individuals were claiming to purchase, what products they enjoyed, which television and radio programs they were listening to. And we'll explore the various technological devices that were used to measure what individuals liked and disliked in various products in the market. We should look here. 1920, Liberty in the News was published by Walter Lippmann, journalist, a scientist, gathering evidence. This was an idea of how the news should be compiled in news media. And in 1922, Lippmann published Public Opinion. It's the first book to apply psychology to journalism, first book on media studies in the U.S. Here we have a little quote from Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, 2-volume work, a French sociologist who traveled around the United States and wrote 2 volumes on what he found in the uniquely American style of democracy. He said, in France, the space allotted to commercial advertisements is very limited, and the essential part of the journal is the discussion of the politics of the day, the journal meaning the newspaper. In America, 3/4 of the enormous sheet are filled with advertisements, and the remainder is frequently occupied by political intelligence or trivial anecdotes. It is only from time to time that one finds a corner devoted to the passionate discussions like those which the journalists of France every day give to their readers. This may be something to become aware of. look at your newspaper that you're reading. If you're reading the New York Times, you're going to find that it's about 60-40 split between news and advertisement. 60 to news, 40 to advertisement. If you look at and also look at the kinds of things that are being advertised in the New York Times. Compare this to New York Post, which has about a 50-50 split in advertising to news story, and the stories are written in a much different way. And look at what's being advertised in the New York Post as compared to the New York Times. Which companies are being advertised? Ask these questions. Which socioeconomic group is it appealing to? And it's very fascinating to take these things into consideration.